Innovation, an important term. I would say the root of all deals comes from innovation. And so we thought an amazing way to dive in is to have an opening panel. As you've probably noticed in our agenda, we don't love to do too many panels, but we have something that we call the Dealmakers, which is just the right way to begin and to sit down and have an amazing conversation. Let me introduce your moderator, Yifat Oron. She's been an unbelievable friend to me, the conference and the summit, joined by NASDAQ, Samsung, and Turner. Please. So down. You guys want
to Okay. Okay. So good morning, everybody, and I'm going to be the second one out of a long row of people thanking the clients. So we're really honored to be partnering at this conference for many years now. We're going to open this morning with a panel about global insights and global innovation. And just before I open it up and introduce our distinguished panelists, I'll just tell you a little bit about myself. So my name is Yifat, and I'm running LeumiTech, which is Leumi Group. For those of you who don't know Leumi is one of the two largest Israeli banks. We're running a very big technology banking platform. We're working out of Israel, out of Palo Alto, New York, and London. And out of the 8,000 companies that you saw on stage a little bit before, we're working with 4,500 of them. And so we're very proud and happy to be working with the industry. And I think this morning is a great morning because I think we have three very different panelists, hopefully with very exciting and different point of views on what we're going to talk about. So let me first introduce our panelists. So we have Lauren Hurvitz. Lauren is an Executive Vice President and Global Chief Communications and Corporate Marketing Officer at working for Turner. Hurvitz is responsible for brand reputation across all platforms, internal and external strategic communications, media relations, social media, corporate marketing, and paid media, assuring that all of Turner communication, marketing, and communication reflects Turner core values. And we have some interesting questions for her.
I'm the head of propaganda.
For propaganda. With everything that's going on in media, I think it's going to be exciting to talk about that. We have Bruce Aust. Aust, sorry, who's the Vice Chairman of NASDAQ. In his role, he works closely with NASDAQ Global Listing Services Unit to assist clients and prospects worldwide. He also serves as the president of NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center, located in San Francisco, and played an integral role in the creation and the launch of the center. Last but not least, we have Shankar, who is the Vice President at Samsung Electronics and the head of Samsung Catalyst Fund at Samsung Strategy and Innovation Center. The SSIC is based in Menlo Park, California, and is focused on accelerating innovation for Samsung Electronics. So thank you, everybody. We have a lot of questions, so we'll try to be very brief in the answers. If you can just do a round of, what are you looking for in innovation from your point of view? So, Shankar, please.
Happy to start off. First of all, delighted to be here. I'm a big fan of investing in Israel on behalf of Samsung, so I'll talk a little bit about that. First of all, a little bit of context. Samsung Electronics, you guys probably know the company quite well. We are a $200 billion a year revenue company. Makes us, if not the largest, one of the largest technology companies by revenue. The products you guys know about are, of course, our smartphone, our flat panel TVs, and our semiconductor and display technologies that tend to sell into almost all the products made by our competitors as well. These are the leading products that we make. When you're a company of our scale, innovation is a really important part of strategy, which is how do you continue to grow a company that's $200 billion of scale, right, in technology space. And we do it two ways. We spend about $20 billion of R&D a year. That's one of the largest R&D budgets of any companies. And a big piece of that is actually in Korea, but we have satellite R&D centers around the world, including in Israel. We have Search Israel Research Center that builds one of our very key technologies in CMOS sensors and cameras. So that happens out of Israel. The second piece of innovation for us is to start new businesses, and that is really where I'm focused on. We have our offices right here in Menlo Park, but we have offices in Israel and in Europe. What we do is three things. We focus on areas where Samsung does not have a business in today. An example could be automotive industry or digital health or IoT. So these are very large industries that are getting disrupted right in front of us. To give you a sense, the automotive industry is a couple of $1 trillion in size. Digital health or healthcare spend in the US is about $4 trillion a year. To give you a scale of how large these markets are, and we believe technology is going to play a very important piece in these areas. So we have open platforms in these areas built out of Silicon Valley in Israel and in Europe. We invest in disruptive startups. That's what I do for Samsung, which is new for us. We've been a corporate venture capital investor for over 20 years, but most of the investments used to be mid to late stage investments. What we started doing about 5 years ago is to engage in early stage investments. And we roughly do about 50 to 60 investments a year, about $200 million in total per year. Half of those tend to be here in Silicon Valley, but a quarter of that investment is in Israel. So Israel is one of our very big areas where we make a lot of investments. We've made about 23 investments in the last 3 years in Israel. So we invest in disruptive technology companies there. So that's the second piece. And the third piece is really corporate M&A. How do we grow new businesses by doing M&A? And an example there would be a deal that we just closed a couple of weeks ago, Harman International. Harman International is now part of Samsung. The interesting thing about that is Samsung is now in the automotive business. And it's a pretty large company, but Harman has about 250 employees in Israel, which were 3 startups that were acquired by Harman over the last few years. So now we have a significant presence in Israel, about 500 people or so, both doing innovation projects inside of Israel, as well as the 23 companies that we've invested in that's working very closely with us.
Thank you.
Great. So Israel's generally a key market to NASDAQ. It's one of our largest listing markets outside the US, so I go there at least twice a year to really help to bring more companies to the U.S. markets. But for NASDAQ, as we look at innovation, we are a fintech company. Most people think of NASDAQ as one of the world's largest exchanges, but they don't realize that we really have diversified our business over the last 10 or 15 years to where we ourselves are a fintech company. So when we think about innovation, I think we have it from 2 lenses, where we ourselves are investing in innovation. So we see artificial intelligence really helping us grow our own business, and that's an area that we see where we run surveillance businesses, that we surveil the markets real time for broker-dealers and regulators. So if we can apply artificial intelligence to that technology, then obviously it makes us more efficient. We also see the opportunity to invest in areas like blockchain, which everybody's been talking about, these 2 areas, AI and blockchain. But we see blockchain as a way, we invested in a company here actually in San Francisco that it's called Chain.com, which will help us in clearing and settlements, because we also run NASDAQ, but we run 80 exchanges around the world. So I think the fact that we're looking at innovation through our own lens and how NASDAQ continues to be a disruptive exchange, obviously we are the home to disruptors, so we also have a good pulse on the new industries that are coming out of the market, whether it be obviously the shared economy, artificial intelligence, virtual reality. Those are kind of the themes that we see coming out as we go into 17 and beyond.
Thank you.
So we think about innovation basically in 3 buckets. One is core to our current business. The second is adjacent to our current business, and the third is transformative. So we think about it in 3 different ways. And we've stopped saying things in the media business, or at least in our business, like user and consumer. We're really talking about fans and people. And so everything that we're doing is basically in service to that and improving the experience that people are. Is it me? Sorry.
Thank you.
Sorry, I'm leather on leather on this chair, and I talk with my hands, so I can't guarantee how much you're going to hear. But so we're really trying to improve the experience of fans and how to engage people with that. So we're becoming platform agnostic. How do we improve that experience of the seamless delivery of content across platforms, data and measurement? We've got a data cloud like everyone else. We're interested in basically everything you're talking about at this conference, except for maybe the food part. I can't really fit that in 100%, but cybersecurity, marketing, advertising, anything with personalization of our content and the experience.
Great. Okay, now we're going to move to sort of the subject of our panel today, and it's about globalization. So if I retrack a little bit, I think the last year in the world was a little bit dramatic to everybody. I think nobody accepted, well, it's a known fact, nobody really thought Brexit is going to happen. Then we had an exciting election in America, and we're seeing all kinds of things going on in Europe. And the question I have for each and every one of you is, how is that, in your view, is going to affect or not tech in general? Are the centers of gravity going to move around? Are we potentially moving from going global as a mean of being a big and solid company, or are companies trying to become local, and how this whole thing is going to evolve?
I'm happy to talk about that. We are a global company. 70% of our revenue and employee base is outside of Korea. Korea is a very small country, as you guys know. We think two different things. Innovation has no boundaries. You know, most of us in the intersection of technology and commerce, we all certainly believe in free flow of capital, free flow of people, free flow of information. That's where we really thrive. And I think it's really hard to put boundaries around these principles. We think that specifically for investments, we think that there are a few very robust ecosystems around the world. We're all quite familiar with the local ecosystem here in Silicon Valley, and perhaps ecosystems in Israel like Herzliya, where you have a lot of startups. We think that these ecosystems have a way of bringing free flow of ideas, capital, as well as technology elements together, which is really where innovation thrives. And we think that's going to continue. We think in each of these areas, what is most important is to act locally but think globally. And what I mean by that is our team in Israel has had cumulatively over 40 years of investment experience, venture capital investment experience in Israel. These are folks who've done many, many deals. They have deep trust with the local entrepreneurial community. They've worked very closely with other corporate ventures as well as VCs on the ground. So they are in the flow of ideas. And that's really the way to do it, which is in terms of investments, it's really about having teams that are local, that are deeply entrenched, and yet think globally and work on behalf of Samsung with our interests around the world, despite what is happening.
So when we look at NASDAQ, we are a global company as well. So as I said, we run 80 exchanges around the world. We own the Nordic markets besides the US markets here. But when I looked and I talked to our local companies, we have 5 of the largest companies in the US by market cap listed on NASDAQ. And they are global companies, and their growth is going to come from being a global company. So as we look at the new administration and how we can break down some of the issues like repatriation and corporate taxes, where US still has the highest corporate tax rates in the world, you've got trillions of dollars offshore that US companies will not bring back because of the tax rates that we have here in the US. I think companies are global to grow, and I think we'll continue to see that. If we have lower corporate tax rates, I think the money will come back. But I do think that for the large cap, Fortune 500 companies, their growth is still going to be on a global basis. So I think it is important that as a tech community, we work with Washington to make sure that we don't get too isolated here in the U.S., because otherwise these large cap companies won't have the ability to grow.
Thank you.
So when you think about building a global brand, and I couldn't agree with you more, it is a global to local strategy. I mean, you have to have a core set of values and a strategy that's going to translate, but you have to execute it locally. And at this point in the world, it doesn't only mean by country or region, it means by audience segment as well. And with data, we can do that now in a more effective way. But if you try to take a global strategy and shove it down local markets, it's going to fail every single time. So you have to respect, especially in the content business, and you want to, in any business that you want to be culturally relevant, you have to respect the local culture. And unless you execute it that way, then I think you will fail. But everything communicates. So everything about you have to really think about yourselves as a political candidate, or a company as a CEO is a candidate, a brand is a candidate. So all of your messages need to communicate. Your paid media, your press, your marketing, how you talk to investors, partners, and your employees was a big deal. So all of that needs to be consistent for impact.
Thank you. Bruce, can you give us a little bit of what's going to happen in 2017? And you obviously know about some pipelines of, what's coming up. Whatever you can share with us.
Yeah, so the IPO market has been a little muted this year. There's been roughly 30 IPOs in the U.S. to date. Of those, about 17 were tech, and there were about 13 tech companies, tech IPOs last year about the same time. So, we have a decent pipeline. I think there is a cautiousness for IPOs based on the fact that there's markets are uncertain. We see, up one day, down the next, and I think the VIX is at an all-time low. That usually means it's a good IPO market. But I do think there's an uncertainty, and no CEO wants to get on the road, and 2 weeks on the road show, all of a sudden some volatility happens in the market, and then the investors kind of have them over the barrel. So we think companies are cautious. There's a nice pipeline. We've got a few tech deals that are going to try to get out in April. We are gearing up to be what could be a very busy June. So we're hopeful the markets will do well this year. If you look at the IPOs from the class of 2016, NASDAQ has 9 of the top 10 best performing IPOs of the tech companies that went out in 16. So we're optimistic. We know companies have been dual tracking quite a bit, so they are doing. We had a company like AppDynamics 2 days before their IPO on NASDAQ was acquired by Cisco. We are hearing some of that noise is coming out of the market, and these companies do want to get out. So we see that a lot of the companies that may be dual tracking are really going towards that IPO. So should see a very strong second quarter, we hope at least.
Thank you. So Shankar, what is, I'm sure there are some entrepreneurs in the audience. What are the things that make you excited and you'll actually take a meeting? In what areas?
Really good question. So I think in terms of broad markets, I want to say there are 4 areas that are very interesting to us, and I'll try to intersect that with what is happening in Israel and why that's important to us. We think the market of smart machines, which is smart car, drones, and robotics, is very exciting today. I think you have a lot of combination of sensors and AI and computer vision and natural language processing that comes together there, which is a very exciting space for us. The second space, which is quite exciting for us, is digital health. This is about, if you think about a car, for example, and compare it to, say, 20 years ago, we had to use an oil stick to know how much oil we had. We had to check our tire pressures to know how much tire pressures we had and the car is safe. You don't do that anymore. You get that information on your dashboard. And a car today has about 400 sensors that work to figure out what's happening in the car to tell you before something goes wrong. While if you think about the human body, we usually go to the physician when we are sick. There's nothing to tell us before we get sick that we should be changing our lifestyle or behavior. We think that there are ways to measure the human body in non-invasive, non-intrusive ways and use data to figure out how to live a better life. So that is a really big thing for us. Digital health is very important to us. And finally, connected devices. So we think with smartphones today being in the 10th year of its market, we think that every device out there is going to get connected, and you're going to have 20 to 30 billion connected devices. So Samsung has a role to play in all 3 of these. And then the 4th area is really data infrastructure. There's going to be so much data created by these devices that there's innovation across the board. To connect to Israel, I think there's really 3 areas. Israel is at the forefront of computer vision. And Mobileye is a great example. But what is interesting about that is, even in the last couple of years, the number of new companies that are in the automotive space out of Israel is just phenomenal. 3 years ago, there was really nothing, right? So you had examples like Waze and Mobileye, but really nothing beyond that. But today, it's one of the most robust areas for automotive investments. Last year, we did 9 investments in automotive, 3 of those in Israel. The second area is, again, in and around cyber. Israel is absolutely number 1 in that space. We've made several investments in the cyber area. And finally, data infrastructure. I think there's so much core technology focus in Israel that's another area. So these 3 areas, if you guys have a great idea and you think Samsung can help, please give us a chance.
Thank you. So Lauren, I have a question for you that's general, and then we'll dive into Israel.
Okay.
We used to see startups in the media world just as servicing and giving platforms and infrastructure. And in the last few years, we're seeing tech becoming media by itself. How does that play for your company? And then if you can follow up with that, what are you looking for in Israel?
Yeah. Well, first of all, mobile data and technology have already changed the media business and the content business forever. So we're never going back. That's different. I would say, as we think about startups and innovation, it's really a mix for us. So we are sometimes buying, sometimes we're partnering, sometimes we're investing, and sometimes we're competing. And so that's true across everything. But like I said before, we're in some ways becoming platform agnostic about the way we think about that. And we've got an enormous, what you would call entrepreneur operation at our company, which is in really investing in. We've got startup teams thinking about AR and AI, VR and AI and everything else that you talked about today. So we think about that in lots of different ways, and not to be competitive with the VCs and the private equity firms here, but if you are a startup and you do have an idea, sometimes partnering with a company that has a shared interest and a shared value can be a next wave of growth, because you do have a shared interest in the growth of that company. So that's something that's working for us.
What about Israel?
So in Israel, well, first of all, let me just say about CNN. So we've got a large operation of CNN there. I think everybody knows Israelis like to watch their own news and their own outlets. But when they do want to turn to international news, they look to CNN. So we have a big operation there. But we are co-sponsors of the Bridge project. So I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it is like an incubator period.
An Israeli who's not familiar with the Bridge will be fired.
Okay, well, good. Well, I want to make sure everyone stays in their jobs. So that's been new for us over the past couple of years, but very successful. And we've had a couple of things, particularly with sports, actually, and virtual reality that have been very successful. This company called Pixelot that just worked on the Ryder Cup for us and had provided.
One of their investors is sitting right there.
Yeah. Oh. So it's working, so that's good news. 360 views of the Ryder Cup, and WSC, which we used artificial intelligence to do clips, which really improved the viewer experience. And then Yossi told me about one I didn't even know about in esports. So our company is so big that things are happening all over the place. So we're looking for more of that from Israel.
Great, thank you. So last very brief answers from each one of you, maybe. For those in the crowd who hasn't been in Israel yet and have not invested in Israeli companies yet, if you can sort of give a flavor of what's about those Israeli startups. Are they the same as what we see in the Silicon Valley, or is there a special sort of flavor to them?
Sure, happy to do that. I think there's a couple of different flavors to ideas in Israel. I think typically deals in Israel, they tend to get done within a very small investor community. The investor community is just so much smaller. So it's really important to get to know the few well-connected local venture capital teams and be able to be in the right deal flow network. I think that is really important. The second thing that I think is a little bit different in Israel is we typically see that deals tend to take much longer to close. So it's typically because the negotiations take longer. There's typically a very tight scrutiny on every single thing that is in there. And teams tend, especially first-time entrepreneurs, tend to not think about the big picture as much and how to trade. So think about if a deal can get done in a 2 to 3 week time period in the Bay Area in Silicon Valley, expect that it'll take at least 2 to 3 times longer. You need local teams negotiating and getting these things done the right way for you. So those are probably the 2 things I'd like for you guys to think about.
Thank you.
Yeah, so as I said, Israel's an important market for us. We have 78 public companies from Israel that are listed on NASDAQ. We want more. And I think we are working, obviously, to make it easier for companies to go public in the U.S. I think with the administration and the new SEC chairman, if he gets approved, they are looking at ways to lower the cost of being a public company. And I think some of the hurdles that we see for Israeli companies is they see that coming to the U.S. is kind of a high bar, and so a lot of times they will sell before they go public. And we're really looking at ways to lower the regulation, lower the cost of coming to the U.S. markets to access capital, so that more of these companies will grow in Israel and have the ability to access capital at a lower price. So we're working closely with Congress and with the new administration to see if we can't lower some of those burdens to being a public company in the U.S. and ideally see more companies from Israel list eventually.
Great news.
I mean, as a marketer, something I would like to see is there's so much, what you see from a lot of the Israeli companies that we see is very need and solution-based, very practical and also innovative, and there's so much of that in every category across what's going on. And as a marketer, I would love to see a much more concentrated and aggressive propaganda campaign for what's happening in Israel and the amount of innovation that's coming out of it, because I think that gets lost sometimes, especially in the US and around the world. So I would just love to help with that, anybody who wants my advice, but I think that would really help Israel break through.
Okay, great stuff. Thank you, everybody. I hope it answers some questions.